This video and podcast is not intended to be used as medical advice, and there is no claim that anything I mention can be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or injury. You are responsible for what happens if you use information in this show to treat any medical condition, and I am not responsible for anything that you choose to do. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Not Medical Advice. I'm Daryl Becker. These are some medical stories and interviews that will showcase effective medical options you've probably never heard of or haven't seriously considered. If you have a medical condition, you can find effective professionals to help you. And I am joined today with Aesha Gaouette. I got that right?
Gaouette.
Gaouette. I messed it up.
It's fine.
Aesha Gaouette, private medical researcher in Arizona. I have appreciated your research that you've done for me, thanks to Facebook, for a few months now. And you've been researching medical issues since at least 2008, right?
Correct.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm going to go to open up these questions I've got for you. So yeah, this is the first one I had was, so what does it take to be qualified to research medical issues like this coronavirus situation going on?
Okay, so this will probably be a long answer, but if we may, let's explore the definition of qualified.
Yes.
To answer your question properly, to be qualified is to be officially recognized or certified as being trained to perform a particular job. If we take the argument that we must be officially recognized or certified to research medical issues, then every single student in college would fail or would have failed their research papers since the introduction of the internet, or since access to the internet was made essential for graduating university. Surely there are people who can and still conduct their own research without internet by accessing books and articles at their local libraries or other institutions. However, in the year 2020, the internet is a more widely utilized medium for research. There is not one university or community college in Western civilization that does not train or educate college students to access the internet or to then utilize the internet as a medium for research. When people on social media, like for example, people on social media accuse you of like being a Google doctor, right? I often wonder if they actually attended college for this reason. You cannot get through college without internet, and you cannot complete a research paper in college without conducting your own research. And very quickly, if we address the fact that the rules of plagiarism are explained to students before they even enter university. Like for those who do not know what plagiarism is, according to the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, to plagiarize means to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own, to use another's production without crediting the source, to commit literary theft, to present a new and original idea or a product derived from an existing source. So either without giving credit. And then plagiarism.org, they quote, they say, plagiarism is an act of fraud. It involves stealing someone else's work, lying about it afterward. Words and ideas which are stolen they're words and ideas which are stolen, and it's considered plagiarism. And according to US law, the expression of original ideas is considered intellectual property and is protected by copyright laws, just like original inventions. And almost all forms of expression fall under copyright protection as long as they are recorded in some way. And again, according to plagiarism.org, plagiarism is turning in someone else's work as your own, copying words or ideas from someone else without giving credit, failing to put a quotation in quotation marks, giving incorrect information about the source of a quotation, giving words by copying the sentence structure of a source without giving credit. And then the very last one, which I think is the more important one. It's copying so many words or ideas from a source that it makes up the majority of your work, whether you give credit or not. And that's an end quote from plagiarism.org. So in case I've lost anybody by discussing plagiarism, the point is that the reason we are taught about plagiarism before attending university or during the very first months of university is because it is illegal to steal anyone else's ideas. And when students are expected to complete a research paper, they are expected to have completed the research paper using information they researched independently, sourced properly, and came to their own independent conclusions about. So I'm not saying you must have attended college to know how to research. I'm saying that even 2 or 3 months of college education will prove to you that you do not have to be qualified to research anything on the internet, let alone type in medical journals or medical studies on a search engine. Medical journals and studies would not be available to the general public if official recognition or certification was necessary to access these studies beforehand.
Perfect. And just wanted to just interject with, have you had some college?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, me too. I've had too much.
Too much.
Yeah, absolutely too much. My wealthiest friends are high school dropouts. Absolutely. And,
Oh,
I would say some of the most impoverished people I know are still paying off their collegiate degrees, even some of them paying off their medical degrees. And that's just a common situation. But yeah,
absolutely.
did you have more that regarding your
Yes.
qualifications to do medical research, which I think you covered really beautifully? Okay.
Right.
I mean, I'm going to say that you get my stamp of approval of you're qualified to do medical research for you and to help me out.
Right.
Because you get you're getting the information that I'm looking for. And anything else you want to add to being qualified?
Yeah, just in summary, like anyone can access medical studies by simply using a search engine. The question was, what does it take to be qualified to research medical issues? And the answer is simply that qualification to research is a misnomer. You do not need to be qualified to conduct research. You can research anything with or without a college education. There are certain principles that I believe should be upheld within all of us before conducting research, like a promise to be objective and unbiased, which is what true science is really about. But even without these principles, any and everyone can research medical issues without official recognition or certification.
See, that's perfect. And that last part really answers it. So, have you researched any other medical official stories besides the coronavirus situation?
Yes, I have researched other medical official stories besides the coronavirus. The H1N1 virus of 2009 was probably the one that really caught my attention. Um, it was probably the one that really made me question even more so Big Pharma. And that one had another official narrative that it came from an animal. So if anyone remembers, H1N1 was also referred to as the swine flu because it was allegedly derived from pigs, or the cell structure. They said that the cell structure of H1N1 was similar to those found in pigs. And I hope people are noticing the pattern here, how HIV came from monkeys, H1N1 came from pigs, and SARS-CoV-2 now is allegedly derived from bats. Of these, the seriousness in the H1N1 scare of 2009 came with the proposals for mass vaccination, just like the current SARS-CoV-2. And thankfully, with respect to the H1N1, they were unsuccessful in that. I just think a lot of people back then simply weren't afraid enough. I remember myself, I was passing out flyers to people back then that I had researched, with information I had researched about the H1N1. And I was explaining to people how the vaccine they were trying to push hadn't even gone through rigorous safety testing, which they're required to do. And it's seemingly they're doing the same thing with this SARS-CoV-2. They're trying to push the vaccine, accelerate it with or without, sufficient safety testing.
This is very familiar. And I've also been looking at those as well. I've spent a long time in down, I would say, the HIV and AIDS rabbit hole. That was where I started actually back in 1998 when my training officially began. And yeah, it's been a long time going down that road. Um, so jump into, how about this one? When did you first start questioning the official story of this COVID-19 situation?
Um, so I'm going to question any official narrative because I'm, to me, if they're pushing something and it's uniformly being pushed, like every single news source is talking about it, then I'm immediately going to question it because so often when that's the case, the track record is that when that's the case, it's usually some kind of sensationalism that they're wanting everyone's attention on this. Why are they wanting everyone's attention on this? So I started questioning the official story of COVID-19 immediately when they started pushing it on the headlines, and then even more so when they shut everything down. Because of all the alleged outbreaks we've had over the years, or at least in my 33 years of life, we were never forced to shut everything down while big business like Walmart and Amazon were permitted to stay open. And intuitively, I knew a bigger agenda was afoot. And then I came across doctors who were questioning the official narrative as well. And I stopped listening to most of those doctors after a few weeks because they were claiming that COVID-19 was real and it was infectious, but some of the things were being inflated. And so by the time many of these doctors were blowing the whistle, I had already made up my mind that COVID-19 wasn't what they were saying it was.
Yeah, that's pretty much right line with what I've been looking at. And just to jump back to the qualification to research this issue and look deeper at it, I'd recommend the viewers and listeners to look at the book called Disciplined Minds by Jeff Schmidt. It is a book all about the actual process of becoming a medical professional or a qualified professional in the sciences in general, and the soul battering impact of that training and how it impacts their lives. And you end up with very conformist and obedient, and I would say philosophically apathetic individuals who really, really toe the party line as a majority. And the ones who do the best towing of the line make the most money, by the way. You can go ahead and look, if you put in your search engine, Disciplined Minds, Jeff Schmidt, and unwelcomeguests.net. The whole book is in an audiobook form. Everything but chapter 5, which is all mathematics and statistics, is in audiobook form. And you can go ahead and listen to Disciplined Minds, and you can get a feel for what someone like myself and medical doctors and all types of scientists, biochemists, all types of professionals, physicists, what the scientists all have to go through in order to get to that degree. And it's rather incredible. And on the issue of plagiarism, Louis Pasteur, one of the most famous plagiarists that most people don't really equate with plagiarism, as he was well known to have plagiarized the work of Antoine Béchamp of that time period. You might know of that one, Aesha?
Briefly, the Pasteur, I would say at least within the last month, as I think Kaufman brought him up and several others.
Yeah. It's kind of incredible when you go down that whole rabbit hole. And yeah, the rabbit hole of Béchamp versus Pasteur, a pretty famous book. I did start that also simultaneously in '98 when I began to be trained as a medical professional. So yeah, now that going into questioning, so yeah, any things that really started making you question the popular narratives going on? You can answer this however you want. Say the narratives or what made you question them.
Okay. Some of the things that made me question the popular narrative, or of course, again, my own biases, you could say, because I have not trusted big pharma for well over a decade now. So my own bias contributed to my questioning the popular narrative. going back to the bad track record, Big Pharma has a really bad track record with respect to sensationalism. Anytime there is an alleged outbreak and yet the population doesn't go down by a significant amount, like ever. We are still approaching 8 billion people in the planet, according to like mainstream science. And there has yet to be a pandemic that wiped out even a quarter of the population. So it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf whenever these things come out. It's like another pandemic, another outbreak. It's always like I'm at the point where I just take it with a grain of salt every time. And then, you know, with if we also consider everything else Big Pharma is responsible for, like the opioid epidemic, which, like, according to the CDC, 67,000 people died from drug overdose in 2018. And of those deaths, almost 70% involved a prescription or illicit opioid. So the fact that even prescription drugs, which are known to kill people, are permitted to remain on the market goes to show that Big Pharma does not care about death rates. And like when it comes to their own highly lucrative prescription drugs. So why, I guess my question would be like, so why do they now want to claim that they care about a death rate of an alleged, you know, bat virus, you know, when so much of their products that they push, all these major, huge pharmaceutical companies who are now racing for this vaccine, you know, so many of them pump out these prescription drugs every year, knowing the death toll. So it's like conflicting things when they know that their products are harmful and yet they want to race to save the world.
Yeah, that's pretty much covering it as far as popular narratives, and that some of them basically. I'm hoping that, well, actually, I know for sure that you've taken a look at the PCR test, the polymerase chain reaction test, or I'll give it the full name, the reverse transcription qualitative polymerase chain reaction test, and the versions of this test that exist out there. So based on your research so far, what is a PCR test and what does a PCR test do?
Okay, the PCR test, people don't know, it was invented by Dr. Carrie B. Mullis. Anyone can look this up. Carrie B. Mullis was born on December 28th, 1944. He won the Nobel Prize of Chemistry in 1993, which it is said that the reason he won that Nobel Prize of Chemistry was because of the PCR test. He died in August of 2019, so just last year he died, which I think makes this all the more peculiar, you know, that they would push the PCR test so much after the inventor who invented it died. I mean, I can't think of a time the PCR test was ever so popular as it is now.
Right. Allegedly,
You know,
I believe he died of pneumonia, but I'd have to look deeper into that one.
right. So, yeah, I'm not sure why he died either. I didn't look into the cause of his death, but it was just last year, and you know, he can't correct anyone or any institution claiming to be using the PCR test for purposes it was not intended for. You know, he can't dismiss false claims or false science. He can't do any of that because he's no longer here. And that's unfortunate, you know, because you would think the inventor would know the most about his own test. And so he invented as you said, he invented the polymerase chain reaction test, which is also known as the PCR test. And he himself stated that the PCR test should not be used to identify viruses because it does not test for viruses. And this can be found if you type in a search engine, quotation, questioning the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, 30 years of dissent. So if you type that into any search engine, you will come up with the medical article in which Carrie B. Mullis, his statements are mentioned about the HIV virus, as well as the PCR test and his stances on his own his own invention. And the more popular source would be in the National Library of Medicine, the National Institutes of Health website. Now, as a notation, I should add that conveniently, this article, when you access it, if you're accessing it through the National Library of Medicine. It's listed now as retracted, and it was retracted in October of 2019. So the same month that the alleged coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, began in Wuhan, China. If I recall reading the articles correctly surrounding this whole thing, I believe it was October of 2019 that Wuhan started pushing their headlines, and then so again that the article was retracted within the same time frame, and it was also 2 months after Carrie B. Mullis, the inventor of the PCR, died. So to resume, the PCR test detects RNA fragments, and RNA fragments are not viruses. When someone tests positive from a PCR test, they are being tested positive only for RNA fragments. And our bodies produce RNA fragments for all kinds of reasons, but often the presence of RNA fragments is usually due to an immune response in our bodies. And so that we're clear, an immune response in the body does not always mean that there's something wrong or you're diseased. It could simply mean that your immune system is working. And when it is claimed that the presence of RNA fragments means that a person is diseased, it's not. It's more of a conclusive statement, and it's really speculative, and it's an assumption. Because an RNA, a PCR test doesn't test if you're sick. It just tests that if you have RNA fragments or cell structures. And so, you could have this in your body and still not technically be sick. So to continue, let's see. So again, to say that the RNA fragments signify the presence of a virus is purely speculation. As far as what I've seen with the PCR test, it does not test for viruses. And any number of reasons could be causing the immune response. And the PCR test only tells us that our immune system is responding to something. It does not tell us what it's responding to. And COVID-19 specifically is identified using only an antibody test and or the RT PCR test. So again, this needs to be repeated, because I think not enough people are understanding this, is that COVID-19 is identified only using two tests, the antibody test and the RT PCR test.
Yeah, actually, that's fine to jump through to, I can imagine, well, maybe the PCR test has some problems, as I've heard people say. Some problems. Okay. Meaning
Right.
okay, I'll just dismiss everything you just said, Aesha, about the fact that it only detects RNA fragments, which are not even specific to being from a virus. It's really unfortunate that too many people just love to blip over that. I think Ayn Rand had a phrase for that called blank out. But that's just, it's an expression where people literally just pretend not to hear something that they didn't want to hear. And it would, so that they can maintain the same conclusions. So they would just jump to, well, there's an antibody test. Did you look deeper into the antibody test?
Just more so the RT-PCR test. And the reason I went into that is because it's not the PCR test that's doing the testing. They're using the RT-PCR,
yeah,
which is slightly different from the PCR.
Right. I meant, did you kind of look under the hood of what passes for an antibody test for this SARS-CoV-2?
Right. I believe it's also RNA that they're looking for in the antibody test.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't spent as much time on the antibody test. For one thing, they're not really using a lot of antibody tests around the world, or certainly locally to where I live in Hawaii. So it's kind of not really a relevant metric, because the relevant thing is the RT-qPCR, the common test for allegedly to find SARS-CoV-2. but again, has only been there to demonstrate that it amplifies RNA material and not any specific RNA material. Basically, so what are your thoughts around the reported numbers of people who are claimed to have been infected or died from the SARS-CoV-2 virus? What do you think of, what have you been able to find regarding the numbers and the relevance of that?
Well, if we go back to the whole testing, it's like, why, where are they getting the numbers from? Because if we, again, consider the only two tests that they're using to identify the SARS-CoV-2, which again, I guess we should clarify too that SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, to my understanding, and COVID-19 is the, I guess, the immune response to the virus, right? Kind of like HIV is the virus, and then AIDS is the immune response.
Yes.
Would you agree? Yeah. So I guess the when we're considering the RT PCR test, which I'd like to explain as well, we can't really talk about the numbers of the proclaimed numbers of infected without addressing how they're coming up with these numbers. And so the RT PCR test is when they amplify the RNA information, as you said. The PCR test is when they amplify the DNA. So when they're amplifying the RNA, they're having to do so through diluting the information. They're doing it like what they call amplifying the DNA, and they call it amplifying the DNA because it's because the single-stranded DNA is replicated and expanded to the point of dilution in order to produce any number of protein markers, which may or may not be accurate representations of the original single-stranded RNA. So, it's like they're taking the information from these tests, from the RT-PCR test and the antibody test, and they're really diluting the results through the whole process. So not only are they claiming through the results that, okay, you've got RNA, but through the RT-PCR test, they're amplifying the RNA to the point that they can't really say for sure, like, that it's the origin or anything in that regard. They're just telling you that it's you've got the presence of RNA in your body, therefore you're infected. And so if we're going to talk about the reported numbers of people who have claimed to have been infected or died of SARS-CoV-2, then we have to look at how are they coming to that conclusion. And what they're saying is that the way they come into that conclusion is through the testing. Well, what is the testing? The testing is antibody testing and RT-PCR testing. And if you really go down and research those two forms of testing, it's and neither of those testing methods identify or isolate viruses. They only identify cell structure fragments, and medical personnel are trained to look for RNA fragments of those cell structures, and that's it. And it's extremely speculative. So it's like when they say the numbers are going up or they're going down, or they're eradicated over here and they're increasing over there. Again, it's like if we're not sure that the testing is doing what they're saying it's doing, then we cannot know that the numbers they're telling us even mean anything.
Right. There's an emotional impact that I see when I bring this subject up with folks who would wish to stay firm on their conclusions that the testing is somehow accurate. Reminds me too much of the movie Idiocracy, where the main character is trying to explain that the plants need water, and the other folks who are obviously needing some help are all saying, no, it needs Brawndo, because Brawndo has what plants crave, electrolytes, and
Right.
and they keep, how does that help? Because it's got electrolytes, because it's what plants crave, because it's got electrolytes, because it has what plants crave. And they keep going around in a circle like that. And they're saying, but the numbers are increasing, but they died of the SARS-CoV-2. And the point that you just took a long time to open up, that the RT-qPCR test is basically not in any way shown to be accurate, that kind of, gets right to the heart of things. So for those who have the emotional fortitude, actually, now I'm going to talk to the listener and viewer out there. If you have the emotional fortitude to watch a show like this and not be getting angry or trying to leave an angry YouTube comment, which I made sure to not allow until I get to approve it, I'm no longer letting random people just spout off on my on my page, on my YouTube page. I would say that if you have the fortitude to listen, that's great, and you're a researcher. You're able to look deeper at these questions that we're covering. If you are grieving the loss of someone that died, and they were given the diagnosis of having died of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, then I'd say that your job is to grieve the loss of this person, celebrate their life, and spend some time healing. Because unless you're very good at researching while you're grieving, which is a minority of people, what you really are best served doing is taking care of yourself and helping the people who, are affected by this loss. And that's my ask for the viewer and listener to the show. But if you aren't affected by a personal loss like this, and you do have critical thinking intact, and you're not like the characters in Idiocracy, then you can ask and answer these questions, and you can research them. And that moves me on to this question of, have you looked for and been able to find a paper that verified this SARS-CoV-2 virus as having been isolated and purified, meaning that you removed, in the paper, they removed all extra genetic material, all extra stuff, and they just have the virus?
No, there are articles, you can type in SARS-CoV isolated, and you will get results. You will get studies implying that they isolated it. But again, when you understand what the studies when you read through the actual study, you'll see that it hasn't actually been isolated. It's just the claim is there, but it's deceptive. And so to go on what you were saying earlier about, knowing people who died from COVID-19, I'm not saying people are not dying. I'm not saying they're, people, they're giving us numbers and those numbers have nothing to do with people dying. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that generally speaking, when we're talking about a scientific method here, it's being skipped. So people are dying, but what are they dying from? And we don't know, because the testing method that they use to identify this thing don't even identify viruses.
That's pretty much the problem. I've found the same thing. I keep asking my pro bono researchers like you, Aesha, and the several other people out there, the people who actually hold me in some, good regard. They think Daryl means well. Let me help him out. Let me try to find the papers. And they send me things that I look at, and there at the end of the paper, it finally says that they didn't really isolate it. They have actually a soup of some nasal swab that they mixed with monkey kidney cells and antibiotics. And then from there, this sickening crap is called, like, they found something and needs further research, could be the end of the paper, or then at the end of it, it will say didn't really isolate it. So like the title of the paper, like you mentioned, and then the end of the paper are completely opposite. At the title of the paper saying that they isolated it, at the end of the paper saying they didn't, over and over again. And that's been what I've seen so far. It's been a fascinating process, like I said, of folks who really would love to think that it's been already found. They've got some strong conclusions. I just started a new thread on Facebook asking again, one of the folks, acupuncture colleague of mine actually, who just offered that you can research this and find it, Daryl. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of have tried, but it's kind of not there. And if you actually read them, if you actually look deeper and look at the end of the paper, you'll not see that it's not there. So it's been, yeah. It's been generally frustrating. I actually fully lost my cool several nights ago. There's nothing like being tired and at the end of a workday to really lose perspective with someone who I would have to say really wanted to keep that same firm conclusion. And they brought up that question of what about all these people who died in New York? And I wanted to address that with a hypothetical, since I can't obviously look at their medical charts and actually I can't have postmortem tests run that I would ask for. Um, a healthy person allegedly who gets the virus is tested positive according to these style of PCR tests. And I'm just going to call them PCR tests, even though it's an RT-qPCR, whatever. But I'll call from here on out in this whole session we're doing, Aesha, I call them PCR tests. Okay.
Okay.
So what happens? Like they tested positive and they died, and they were healthy ahead of time. And I'd say maybe they were healthy, but here's all it takes, really. Let me explain a hypothetical. All it takes from my perspective is you're in New York with all of the many pollutions. Have you ever smelled New York City, Aesha? Have you
Right.
ever?
Yeah. I've been there
I've been
many
there.
times.
I've been there many times because I am actually from New York. I was actually born in right outside of the Bronx, and then when I was age 5, I moved a whole hour drive north of New York City. So for me, New York City as a child was where I go for field trips. Like actually, I've had field trips up the Twin Towers when I was a kid. You know, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And yeah, it's a pretty toxic environment, is what I'm saying. There's a lot of toxins there, which can cause allergies. And allergies are similar in the way the body responds to things, to showing like similar to a way the body shows signs of infection. Because I treat people with allergies and I treat people who show signs of infection or, you know, overgrowth of certain bacteria and funguses and parasite problems too, which are real problems, especially here in the tropics. And
Right.
those are real things that can happen to a person. So they look athletic and healthy, and they haven't been tested for heavy metals, various types of other chemical toxins. They haven't been really tested for certain vitamin and nutritional deficiencies. And though they might look like a powerhouse and they like, you know, like young 30s, 40s, etc., those are situations that can be going on. They can be breathing in these toxins from in here, there in New York. They could get a positive test. They could go into the hospital, get a positive test for using one of these PCR style tests. And then they can be given treatments that are certainly toxic. There's some of these antiretroviral drugs are incredibly toxic. They actually will, you know, kill you if you take too much of them in the right amount, or if you're just highly allergic to them, and your body can go
Right.
into systemic shock. And then, of course, if that cascade happens and there's more shock and more, like, say, for example, fluid buildup in the lungs, and then they decide to go and fully intubate you, put you in coma, and then put a tube and start to try to artificially cause you to breathe, wherein 80% of people do not survive that treatment. And that's how those kind of, quote, healthy people die, basically. They came
Right.
in healthy, they just simply had an allergy. Now, flip this on the other side. I'm going to do a little talking. Sorry, we'll get back to
Yeah,
our
you're fine.
discussion in a moment. But on the
Yeah.
other side, if they went to a very effective holistic healthcare provider, as the kind of people that I find for people professionally, they would be looking for the toxins and making some strategies to remove the toxins or reduce the amount of toxins into this person. They would see, okay, there's autoimmune conditions going on. I'm going to modulate and downregulate or rather modulate the immune responses to various situations going on in their body, so as to make less fluids building up in them so that they can breathe again to deal with various situations. They'd be finding the nutritional deficiencies. There's a variety. Yep, there's a variety of ways of doing that. You got that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so like by eating healthy natural foods, like my friend the rooster here, you know,
Yeah.
healthy natural foods around you, but also there are nutraceuticals, that's pharmaceutically refined nutritional products that are highly tested and can be designed, you know, to be they can be tested to be found as biocompatible to the client. And all of these conditions can be made better. The structural problems of problems within the structure of the spine and other components of the health of where the body needs to be, the chemistry, as I mentioned, all the testing and methods of biocompatibility, and the electromagnetic component. That's everything from actual electromagnetic fields that are large impact, like, some people are very susceptible to electromagnetic fields of cell phones, Wi-Fi, and others. And a lot of people are also just subject to being in other field problems. And there's many ways of handling these situations. Living too close to a big cell tower would be one, or transformers in general. People are known to, who live near transformers, to have high rates of growing tumors and cancers. So all of these issues can be found and addressed, and all of the poor people in New York and Milan and China who died recently, they all might have had these situations going on and not looked for. And that's my speculation on that question. Uh, I guess you might know of some of what I was speaking of, Aisha.
Yes, and I agree with you. Wuhan, China was compared to New York City by several sources. So it, with the population and the technologies they have there, and all kinds of cell towers, cell phone towers, the live billboards who emanate their own kind of electricity, and what have you. All sorts of things could have contributed to some kind of influx in their medical system.
Yeah, I know this one's a lot more of my field because this is what I do. This is what I've been doing for years now. Though I'm feeling like I'm finally starting to get good at it, actually. But there's so many variables in health. And when you're a medical provider, especially when you get paid in cash, you're highly incentivized to deliver results. If you'd like to keep the client and grow new clients and all of that, you're incredibly incentivized to grow, to get results, to find out what I call the causal vectors. And I was naming them: toxicity, deficiency, structural damaging, electromagnetic damaging. And by the way, amongst the electromagnetic damaging is even the subtle emotional and mental problems that go on. These are literal damages to people's ability to critically think and manage thoughts, and their ability to manage their emotional terrain, to balance their emotional terrain. And all of that together equals health if it's balanced, and it equals disease when it's out of balance. So yeah, most of that is just like it's good, because in this case of the global situation, we're talking very much speculation, all these numbers that are bandied about to us, of these numbers going up, these numbers going down here and there. Yeah, I want to just ask in a general thing, you've seen and researched some of the global situation of the lockdowns that have happened all around, and probably where you live as well. What do you think the impact of this situation, of the various lockdowns that are going on people's health in general, or related to various populations?
Um, so I
Right around
think,
question 8,
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it depends, right? It all depends on where you're at, because seemingly different local governments had different regulations. Some of them were lax, some of them were more strict, and um, and I think it varied where you were. So like over here in Arizona, it was more lax, and then I mean, everything was still shut down, right? A lot of people were still forced to uh, go home or close down. But then we started opening up a bit more, a bit earlier than other places. Um, and I think it's clear that the places in which it was more strict, people generally were, in a way, like succumb to this fear, right? Because you'll notice that the places that was more strict, when they were opened up again, masks were immediately required. in a lot of the places. So that seems to be a pattern throughout these states in the US. The ones that had a more strict lockdown procedure, when they reopened, you had to wear a mask in most public places. Whereas the other places like Arizona, you weren't required to wear a mask, but now you kind of are. And it's still kind of lax here and there. Like Phoenix has a religion exemption for masks. So you could just walk into a place and say, it's against my religion, and no more questions asked. But I think that from what I've seen, you know, friends on social media, different platforms, it was like normalized in some regions, and it's fought in other regions. So like in New York, in some areas in New York, you'll like videos I've seen, cell phone uploads from people, like it seems like in some areas of New York, it's you go into a store and you're demonized for not having a mask on. But if you go over here in Arizona, you go into a store and you're not wearing a mask, people might give you a look, but you know they're mostly quiet, keep to themselves. So again, how it's affecting everyone is dependent on where they're at, you know, how strict the shutdown was for them, and then how strict the reopening is for them now. And I think too, I don't know if you've noticed, but it so much of this, the way it's played out overall, big picture, it has become a political argument. It went from being a pandemic to now, like the reopening is now a tug of war between political parties. And that's unfortunate because that means like we're like children and the parents are arguing and they can't decide on whether to let us out the house, or they can't decide on whether to let us go to the park and be our normal selves, get back to life, get back to a healthy way of living. And those parents right now are the two political parties, Republican and Democrat. And you'll notice a lot of these states that weren't as strict were Republican states. And the local governments that were strict were usually Democratic. And same with California, and Seattle, Washington. A lot of those states are areas are considered, you know, far left liberals. So you know, and I'm not demonizing either side. I don't vote. I don't believe in the political system. I believe in liberty and all kinds of other things, but I do not believe in you know, favoring Democrats or Republicans or vice versa. I'm simply observing it objectively as a bystander, seeing that it's at this point, if people aren't noticing that it's been politicized, I don't think people are really paying attention. And if we take Trump's recent rally he had yesterday in Tulsa, Oklahoma, nobody was wearing a mask. You know, all these Trump supporters were not wearing masks, and the the turnout was not as big as they were expecting. But either way, though, there were photos, there were videos, there's evidence that nobody was wearing a mask, and so, you know, that's the Republicans. Generally, they don't believe in the masks. They just want to get back to work. Whereas the Democrats generally are seemingly, like Tucson, Arizona, for example, is the mayor is a Democrat, and she recently, the governor of Arizona, issued an order allowing cities and towns to make up their own rules about masks. And because of that, like Mesa, Arizona, and Tucson, and I think Goodyear, Arizona, these different sectors have all signed orders to mandate masks for public settings, of course, with certain exceptions. But again, by and by, it seems, for whatever reason, that if you are a Democrat, you are for the masks. And I think everyone needs to think about that. Why has it been politicized?
Oh, I think about it. I think about it maybe sometimes too often, because divide and conquer is a very old tactic. And I do see the radicalization that happened at the moment of Trump's winning an election. I never have quite seen so many people totally lose their mind as that in 2016. And it just seems to be have been more intensified. And then with this event this year, like you mentioned, with it being politicized, like taking this global alleged virus pandemic and then making it into further a way to another way to divide and conquer people, it's just phenomenal and amazing. And when it comes to people losing their mind, I have now evidence of protesters who demonstrate like wanton violence and that kind of like antagonism towards people who are asking questions or trying to keep everyone accountable by recording everything on video, because that's how you keep everything accountable, is by keeping everything recorded on video. And especially in public places where, guess what, if you're in public, it's all free game to record on video. You know, if you don't want to be recorded on video, don't go out in public. That's the way it goes. And yeah, that's that divide and conquer thing is strong. And I see that as one of the most dangerous components of how things are looking a lot like 1943, which is where you have Japanese internment camps. And there's a theory called the pendulum theory from the book Pendulum. Author Michael Drew is another author, it's co-author to that. And it basically shows how every 40 years, like a pendulum, societies as a whole, with excepting outliers like you and me, Aesha, the whole groups of people move like a pendulum from me and the individualism, which peaked in 1963 and was I'm sorry 1983 is where the peak of the me-ness of all that going on, but it was moving towards that in 1963 and 73 in a big way, and then the other way towards we, and we're getting close to the peak we area of 2023. It's moving fully in that direction. And in the peak me time of the era in this theory, what seems to happen is that more and more people go towards being very self-centered, of course, is the ultimate of it. It can be shallow to some degree. There can be problems with people not fully connecting enough. Although the Back to the Land movement of the 70s was fully happening during the upswing of the me. But the worst part that I can see of me time is it becomes a shallowness, like Material Girl of Madonna. Songs reflect these ways. And the worst part of a we and collectivist era is unfortunately the lynch mob. It is Japanese internment camps. It is warfare, like World War II. And that's the kind of thing that I fear the we of the patterns that I see happening. And I fear people who just want to jump to conclusions, and would the people out there who, based upon this show that I'm making now, would want to complain to the licensing board here in Hawaii and try to see if they can get me in trouble for speaking my mind and looking at research. I'm not afraid of that, but it's concerning that someone would even consider it. That they would rather have answers that can't be questioned rather than having questions that can't be answered. And I'm the other way around. I'd rather have questions that can't be answered and answers that absolutely must be questioned. Yeah, like getting to that kind of thing, I noticed that there were a different media spin around the protests that were for opening up the lockdowns or various places like Michigan, and then a different media spin completely 30 days later on the protests going on revolving around police brutality and the organization known as Black Lives Matter, and riots around that. And I know I didn't put this full question in here for you to get prepared for, but I'd love to hear your opinion on what you think around all of that.
Well, I was in favor of the riots for reopening, or the protest for reopening for sure. And I was very proud of Michigan when they did that. I was, their governor was really hammering down on them with her strict rules. I think I think even if you're a Democrat, I mean, maybe I want to believe that even if you're a Democrat and you're listening to her, maybe some of what she was saying sounded irrational, sounded a bit too much. But you know, I was for Michigan protesting their lockdown, and you know, rightfully so. Um, but then you're right. Then not long after, um, there were protests for George Floyd, and I, of course, you know, everyone saw the video too, probably, right? It was,
Yep.
there were different media outlets pushing it, and you know, we all saw what happened. We can't really deny that it happened the way it did. But you know, and someone lost, someone died, and that's of course always something to mourn and something to respect. That when someone dies, someone passes away, it's always a tragedy. If you have any kind of conscience or humanity within you, you're going to know it's, or feel immediately, that's tragic, that's sad. And it's sad and maybe even angering when you're watching it happen in front of you and you can't do anything to help. So I completely understand the reaction to it from many people, which was anger. You know, and then of course the other two officers who were involved didn't, or three officers, I guess, didn't really do anything. So what I will say though is that people, you know, it's a touchy subject for so many people, and I guess, and it's unfortunate that I have to protect myself. I have to say, like, I'm not a racist before I speak. I have to say, you know, my niece and nephew are half African American, or I have to say that I'm a minority. I'm a Hispanic. You know, it's like I have to say all these things in order to have the right to speak. It seems if I come off as Caucasian, which many people mistake me for, it's like then I don't have a right to speak. And you know, and I've noticed that as well through various discussions online, threads. You know, it's like, well, you're just a Caucasian woman, middle class, and it's like that's not actually who I am. I'm Hispanic, first of all, and my family is very diverse. And I wasn't even born in the States. Technically, I was born on an island. But you know, it's like that's the issue that I see here from all of this, is like, not only were we locked down for some kind of science that still doesn't make sense, but we're also being divided by this this concentration on a division that may or may not even really be there. Again, like, it's like if they're pushing a headline uniformly across several news stations, whatever their political affiliation is, then it shouldn't be, oh my gosh, that's what's happening in the world. It should be, well, let me research that. Let me see what's going on. Let me find out for myself if this is real, this is true. And if we look at statistics, which again can be, depending on the source, depending on who's funding the statistics, statistics aren't always reliable anyway. But if we look at, you know, the like for example, this whole situation, this whole race war that these riots for George Floyd were about, you know, it's not like there's a statistic saying that you know, blacks are being eliminated from the US because of white people. You know, but that's been the narrative, you know, since Trump went into office. And even my own parents believe that because Trump is in office, since he's been in office, that race in the States has been normalized. Racism has been normalized. And there are other countries. I have friends in the UK who can't stand Trump. and they feel he's a racist, and they feel that racism in the US has worsened because of him. And so maybe this was something that was brewing, something that was cooking this whole time, this kind of a societal uproar. The people, people who cried, I mean, broke down in tears when Trump became president. And now, you kept them in their houses, locked up for 3 months. And then the media concentrated everyone's attention on this African American's death by the hands of a Caucasian officer. So it was like, we could say that was the last straw. It was the thing that broke the camel's back. We could say this was happening all along. This was bound to happen all along because the tension was growing in this country ever since he stepped foot in office. And so it's hard to say for sure, if it was the lockdowns that did it, that created it, or if this was really just inevitable because Trump is the president and the media has been pushing him as a racist all along. But I will say that just a few weeks ago, Trump came to Arizona, and he promoted this Mexican American restaurant not far from Tucson, north of Tucson. And he brought the restaurant owners up on stage, and one of them didn't know any English, and she spoke completely in Spanish. And he gave her time on the microphone to thank him in Spanish and to thank the administration for promoting their business, which, their business was one of the ones that were suffering during the lockdown.
Did you hear the version in Spanish?
Right. Yes.
And do you speak Spanish?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. Yeah. So I understood exactly what she was saying. She was thanking Trump. She was thanking the administration. And she said at the end of her comment, she said, Mexicans for Trump, in Spanish. So, and I see that, I see that in a lot of places here, that there are actual Hispanics and African Americans who are for Trump. They don't perceive him as a racist. And again, I'm not on for either party. My point is that there are so many people in this country who believe that the racism in this country, to me, is far worse than what it is. And again, I'm speaking as a Hispanic. I'm speaking as someone who has a diverse family. I have African Americans in my family, and if you've ever been to Puerto Rico, we come in different colors, shapes, and sizes. We have Black Puerto Ricans. And skin tone is black. Some of them have blonde hair, blue eyes, and it's similar in Mexico as well. Mexico is very diverse. So, the point is that it's like, I think from my own perspective, we were kind of herded into this division all along. And whatever broke the camel's back was going to happen eventually, inevitably, it seems. But of all the people that die, of all the different deaths that we see on the news, and why was his death, why was George Floyd's death concentrated on? Why were we all made to focus on his death? And why was it that it was pushed as a white officer and a Black man, when there were two other minority officers involved as well, a Hispanic and an Asian? So, I guess there's like confusion here, because it's like people are making it literally a black and white thing, when the story itself was not a black and white thing. There were more details to the story, but it was pushed as a race issue, and that created more division. So not only are we being divided by masks, people who are for masks and against masks, or people who are for the lockdown and against the lockdown, but now we're being divided by race. We're being attacked by all fronts, and if people could just elevate themselves above these confusing conflicting things. They would see like that who's driving all this, who's controlling our perception here. And it's the media. It has always been the media,
The mainstream media.
the mainstream media.
Yeah. Those are the mainstream media is the one that's widely disseminated to, like talking MSNBC, CNN, a lot of the late night cable shows, the Daily Show, etc., the Comedy Central networks. Who are some of the biggest funders of these channels that I just mentioned? Oh yeah, that would be the pharmaceutical companies. I think that they are the number one, like, largest donor to all of the media that I just named. I think that the media that you were referencing.
Right.
Yeah. So that's
Absolutely.
been going on for a while. And yeah, the narrative was very fishy. I'm glad that I put in a question about it. And I appreciate that you revealed your own heritage. I have sometimes had a desire to do the same thing. As an example, if I want to say something that'd be critical of the state of Israel or certain specific people in media who happen to have a certain type of heritage, I like to preface it that I'm speaking as a man myself whose mom had a bat mitzvah. And I could have gone to Israel on the free birthright trip, back between age 18 and 33. It's available to everyone who's got that type of heritage. And, I could have quickly gone and gotten my own bar mitzvah and then gone on the trip. Could have done that. And have, a time in Israel and a stamp on my passport. And now I get to question the Holocaust, official stories and the official evidence around the Holocaust. And now I get to question that. But for anyone who just listened to that, and there probably are a few, and they can now come up with ways to hate on me just because I want to question official stories around that. They could say I'd be a Holocaust denier just by questioning it. And in some countries like Germany, you can actually go to jail for publishing in certain ways any type of questioning the official story around the Holocaust that was claimed to kill 6 million Jews, a number that I certainly would throw into question. And also the bigger numbers of people who died around that whole warfare, many, many other groups, Roma, aka gypsies, homosexuals of all kinds, any type of political or ideological dissident, were all rounded up and killed in many of these horrible ways. And yeah, I like to question things. And so it's interesting when you find yourself around people where I need to bring up my own heritage now, and now I get to question it. And I have to say, I get a little pleasure watching them shut up after I
Right.
mention that fact. As you could watch people, like in the Facebook posts, I think I was helping the thread that I was helping you be on by reposting one of your own posts, that, you mention your own heritage, and all of a sudden you'll notice people get real quiet because now they can't claim that you've got some type of white privilege or something like that, Aesha. Now they're not going to use these terms that I strongly suspect come from Tavistock Institute and the Royal Institute for International Affairs and just plain old Madison Avenue, excellent branding agency, having come up with terms like systemic racism, white privilege, white fragility, and I guess a host of other terms that I strongly suspect having, and of course everything around the pandemic, social distancing, flatten the curve. Help me out here. What are the other phrases that we're all in this together? There's one.
Right. Yeah.
There's a
home,
lot of those.
Safe. Yeah.
Stay safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a thing like that. When I got into being a person who gets invited onto podcasts, it was around the subject of nonviolent communication and critical thinking. I was someone who was known to put the two together. It's like that. It's not about thinking and versus emotions. It was about effectively thinking with a methodology and having methodologies to balance the emotional terrain. and I get invited on a variety of shows to cover that. And I find myself constantly challenged when I bring up these topics with people, because they would really wish to maintain the same conclusion, and they don't have an interest in understanding or actually having, the actual courage and humility to investigate their method of critical thinking or their own method of how they balance their emotional terrain. And often the method is to emulate behavior that their parents and other formative people in their childhood demonstrated. And that's their method. And since we're both parents, we both understood that the tragedy of being a parent and not investigating how you were parented and the impact that has is to pass on the same types of damages to our children. So what I see as an opportunity in all this is, how can I find new ways to make a bridge of empathy to all the people who are pro-mask and all the people who say that the science is settled, one of those science things like that. And how can I find a way to inspire curiosity and flexibility in investigating, and the humility to acknowledge that could have gotten it wrong. I've gotten many issues wrong in my past, and I can name them, and the courage to actually face those things, those qualities. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. I'm going to ask you about, so we're coming like to the last couple things, just about, what do you think that the listeners and viewers can do to be better prepared for what's going on right now, Aesha?
And so before I answer that question, if I could just touch, I mentioned
go back to what I just said. Yeah.
The question about the riots and all that, I want to point out that 3 days before the news concentrated the story on George Floyd, 3 days before that, on May 22nd, 2020, Joe Biden said to a black man, "If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black." Okay, that was a white man telling a black man, "If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or a president, then you're not black." Like, that was a very racist comment to make. There were no riots when Joe Biden said it. There was no backlash from the Democratic Party, because Joe Biden's the Democrat. What there was, however, was a stream of so many people, African Americans, uploading videos and making social media posts, attacking Joe Biden for making his racist comment. And then 3 days later, on May 25th, was when the news again concentrated on George Floyd's death. And the narrative was, white officer kills black man. And there was a protest for that. So, so again, there's like, depending on your political affiliation, depending on who's saying it, who's doing it, the media is quiet on some things, but loud about other things. And that's all I'm saying in that respect. It's like, we need to understand that there's a bigger picture here, and that if we are allowing the media to control our discussions and to control how we react to those things by being silent or quiet about one occurrence and then being louder about something else, then we are okaying this. We are consenting to the division. We are consenting to being pushed and pulled one direction and another, based on this whole thing, this whole control through media manipulation.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And for the listeners and viewers out there, you can watch the movie Wag the Dog with Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro, Woody Harrelson. It's late 90s, I believe, and it actually covers a president who does a scandalous thing, kind of like Joe Biden saying, "If you don't know who to vote for, you ain't black." That's pretty scandalous. If in the history books Abraham Lincoln was quoted having said that to a black man, that would kind of, that would not have been rubbed away as easily. Especially if it had been on video. like nowadays, it would not have been, that would not go away if there had been video and social media to repeat it like endlessly and be the butt of incredible amounts of jokes. 3 days later, you have these protests, the George Floyd snuff film I'm going to call it, go out there. That's what it is, a death on film being widely promulgated, widely spread around, and that's all it takes. And then the riots, and then a complete 180 of the media now saying that riots are okay. Riots are now not endangering people's health, but now riots are important. People need to go out there, maybe take a little bit of precautions, obviously. And the wide number of people out there would be on the Democrat side. Huge numbers of people wearing masks for all that does, kind of like the chain link fence to try to keep out mosquitoes. I love that analogy for these cloth masks that are being worn. A chain link fence to keep out mosquitoes. And of course, like we covered in the first part of the show, a questionable, potentially non-issue. Yeah, it's kind of amazing what's happened so far, and I really appreciate your thoroughness of your answer. I'll answer as far as like this question of what I think the listeners and viewers can do to be better prepared right now is to grow patience with your friends and family and colleagues who are of the opposite perspective. And I think the majority of people listening and watching are going to be probably supportive of what you and I have had to say, Aesha, because that's the way it works so far, is the folks who are patient and curious and looking deeper in are going to be on the liberty side. I've got a huge number of friends who consider themselves part of the huge tent called the Liberty Movement and Liberty community in general. Many who use the self-identifying labels of voluntarist and anarcho-capitalist and libertarian. And then, of course, there's the folks who are actually Republican and still are trying to square the circles of making government somehow work in their favor, which I totally understand, since I did fantasize about that about 20 years ago. And, yeah, I remember that. I kind of came from that perspective, actually. I didn't fully leave that perspective until 2008. So that's actually only 12 years that I really started leaving that perspective. I needed to move to Hawaii and leave certain types of freedoms behind in Vermont to understand how much liberty and freedom was important to make the world that I want to make. And I asked for people just to be better prepared by growing food, making sure that you have good health and take care of your health. Once again, notmedicaladvice.co. I'm there to help your health, but there are many other places to go besides, to maintain connections to the people that are the source of your life right now. That these connections are vital. You don't make everything in your life. You're not an island. You're not Robinson Crusoe inventing everything for yourself. Like I would say, you, the listener and viewer, you require connections with other people. And to make those connections solid and harmonious with reducing conflict, increasing harmony. And just really, really have the patience to hear people out when you have the time, and to really, understand who you want in your inner circle. Who do you want in your unpaid life? Which is, why I chose you to be here, Aesha, since I didn't pay you to be here. And,
Right.
you didn't pay me to get on the podcast. Someday. And
Right.
that's my suggestions. What would you like the listeners and viewers to know to help them get prepared?
So similar to what you're saying, try to get into growing your own food. There are so many sources now you can look into, search on a search engine. People farming, gardening in their own apartments. It's so easy to do it now. Different packs you can buy, from Home Depot or Amazon, that just help you garden and grow your own food very easily without even having a backyard. So it is possible for you to start growing your own food and get into the practice of growing your own food. And you're going to want to do that because you're going to want to be as independent as you can be. Especially when, again, the world and the governments are battling it out, you don't want to be cut off from your own food supply, your own means of living and surviving. Another thing too is maybe a food storage. If this were to happen again, which different sources are saying we're looking at another lockdown because of the second wave. We don't know anything yet, but Another thing is food storage. You could simply spend, $30, $60 on canned goods and just keep them somewhere in your house in case you can't leave, in case you can't go to the store to get any food. Um, and of course, water. It's always good to have gallons of water, maybe 10, 20 gallons of water somewhere stored in your house, just in case. But another thing is and I struggle with this myself, and I'm very open and honest about it, is to ask yourself when you're being given a story, even if it's a very popular story, even if everyone's talking about it, and even if all your friends are agreeing that it's an actual thing, it's to ask yourself, are you being objective? Or are you responding to the story through emotion? Because more likely when you're responding through emotion, you're not being objective, you're being biased. And I myself admit to being biased. But the goal here is to be on the side of truth. And if we are muddied and blurry in our vision, then we can't be on the side of truth because we're distracted and we're being manipulated by our own biases and our own emotions. And so again, to me, so many of these problems we've experienced in the last 4 months are a direct result of mainstream media manipulation. And my inner circle of friends, my family, we're not racist. I don't have a problem with racism in my immediate circle or in my community. We don't even talk about it because it's not an issue for us. And this goes for the members of my family who are African American as well. We don't have an issue with it. It's only an issue for you if you make it an issue for you. And if you allow the media to tell you repeatedly that this is a crisis, and it's like, well, you really want to research that. You really want to look at those numbers. You really want to research those statistics and understand for yourself if it's actually what the media is saying. And it's the same with this COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2. You want to not just receive the information and accept it at face value. You want to understand what you're looking at. And again, these medical journals, these medical studies, they're not just for doctors and nurses. They are available to the public for a reason. And if you understand the RT PCR test and the antibody test, and you understand what they do, how they work, then you can better understand what you're looking at. In 2020, we have so many sources available to us that it's almost like a personal responsibility, I think, to understand what you're reading. And that if you're going to read a medical journal, you're going to read a medical study, and you don't understand what you're reading, you don't understand the terms, look them up. Give yourself that discipline to look something up that you don't understand. And that will help you become more objective. It will help you understand that maybe we don't really know what this was all about. It could have been pneumonia. Pneumonia kills 60,000 people a year. Tuberculosis kills 1 million people a year worldwide. Pneumonia is 60,000 people a year in the United States. That's not even the whole world. It could be anything. And so the objective is to be objective. It's to be not so led by emotion that you create separation from reality and separation from those around you who you care about.
That's perfect. And I really want to leave this show on this awesome, positive note right now. So I want to thank you so much, Aesha, for coming on the show. Aesha Gaouette, got your name right this time. Yeah. And I really appreciate your help. I'm looking forward to our next show. I'll be sending some topics for you to look over. And I hope that you give me a thumbs up for one of them. And I want to just, any last words you want to say to the folks out there?
And just, it's very easy to be angry. It's very easy to be led by emotions. But I think that what we need right now, worldwide, is to push more for advocacy. As a safety trainer, when my students would get into accidents, I wouldn't demonize them because they made a mistake. I would correct them, help them through advocacy by advocating for them to become better, to learn from what they did and to become better, and to believe in them and support them to make better decisions. And I think that's the best way to go about this going forward, is for everyone, if we can, as much as we can, instead of demonizing and writing people off, or assuming someone's ethnicity, assuming somebody doesn't understand the problems of the world. Be an advocate for education and information.
Perfect. And thank you so much. I want to just say, if you're having some problems that are chronic healthcare problems that you have no idea how to find any help for, you're finding that it's challenging out there to research it, please go to notmedicaladvice.co. I'd be happy to reach out to me, connect with me there. I help find people healthy professionals. I help find people professionals to get you out of that problem. Good health is out there, and wishing everyone a great day.